Well, as pressure mounts on the president to share more information about the Chinese spy balloon and the three other unidentified objects the U.S. military shot down this month, we're now learning that he may deliver remarks this week. And moments from now, senators are expected to receive a classified briefing about China. That includes Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. He is chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. So as you're about to enter this hearing, what are the most pressing questions you have about the surveillance balloon?
Well, Brianna, this specific intelligence briefing is about Chinese capabilities in terms of its military platform and what are the differences in capabilities between their military capabilities, that of the United States, what is the potential to performance of the People's Liberation Army, and a whole host of those items. So it preceded the elements of the balloon. Having been the other day at the briefing that was balloon specific, I would just simply say, look, there's no question that that was a surveillance balloon, and we are still assessing what its capabilities were. It was not a weather balloon. Whether or not it was purposeful or was deviated by wind patterns is something the Chinese are still responsible for once they send that balloon into space. And ultimately, even going over Guam, it's about sensitive information of United States defense capabilities. So they are doing this. They're doing this in Latin America at different sites. So the Chinese are actually engaging in using these spy balloons over sovereign countries, and it has to be called out for that, and there should be consequences for it.
So that doesn't lower your level of concern if, in fact, this balloon deviated off course, because, as you noted, it was still intended to surveil U.S. military bases in the Pacific.
Yes, I mean, I don't think we should let them off the hook that because maybe, and we're not there yet in terms of a exact intelligence decision, that it got blown off course, so to speak, that shouldn't deminimize the reality that they were still intending to surveil. They were still intending to spy upon U.S. military assets. Guam is a territory of the United States, and therefore I consider it the same as if you were flying over the continental United States.
U.S. officials stress that they have confidence that they were able to jam any sort of information that this balloon may have been able to transmit back to China. Do you have confidence in that?
Well, we're going to continue to ask tough questions as we have at these classified hearings. I would just simply say I do think they worked to minimize any potential signatures that our sensitive sites had that could have been picked up by this balloon. But there's obviously a reason the Chinese use it, right? You can get information from satellites, which are way out in outer space, but the ability of a balloon is to hang lower, stay longer, and ultimately capture incredible information. I think we succeeded largely in avoiding that, but that doesn't leave the Chinese off the hook.
Your Republican colleague, Senator Josh Hawley, has said that the U.S. in response to this should be tougher on China and perhaps even introduce new sanctions. Would you support that? Would this balloon itself merit new sanctions against China?
Well, I think we have to have a tougher policy overall as it relates to China. China's our biggest geostrategic challenge, both now and in the future. When I held a hearing today at the Foreign Relations Committee on fentanyl and the number of deaths in America, precursor drugs are coming from China. They're doing nothing in that regard. Their belligerence in the South China Sea, 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps in the 21st century, and so much more. So I think we should be taking on China in a much more robust way than we are right now.
And it comes as relations between the two countries, I don't have to tell you, are at an all-time low. Chinese military officials are not returning calls from their U.S. counterparts. The Secretary of State, in response to this balloon, postponed a visit to China and a meeting with President Xi. And it is reported that Secretary of State Blinken may be meeting with his counterpart at the Munich Security Conference this week. Do you think that that meeting should take place? Would you support that?
Well, look, I think having open lines of communication, especially so that we deconflict any potential risk of conflict that is unintended is incredibly important. And it is alarming to hear our defense establishment say that, in fact, they picked up the phone and called and there was no answer at the other end. That cannot be between two nations, especially nations that may be on a potential collision course at some point in time in the future. And so we want to avoid that. So in order to do that, you have to have somebody to talk to. And in that respect, I think on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, which I'll be at, I think it makes sense to at least establish those lines of communication to deconflict and avoid such conflict.
And lastly, do you think the president should address the public specifically about this Chinese surveillance balloon later this week?
Look, I think when we know more about the other elements that were taken down, which appear to be different in context, but raise questions about even if they're private and for commercial purposes, but they're in airspace that may have hurt civilian aircraft, we have to have a regime that actually says you can't send things up without some type of identifying signal, responder, without some type of flight plan, because ultimately then we're putting commercial flights at risk. So I think at some point, when it's all sorted out, it may be an appropriate time for the president. But I'm not worried about any UFOs, I'm not worried about any invasion, and I'm not worried about a physical risk to the United States in any of this.
Well, that is a relief to hear. Senator Bob Menendez, thank you for your time.
Thank you.